Pardon? Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. We are happy to have so many people here from all over the United States and even other parts of the world, so welcome. My name is Erica Spade-Patras, and I am with the Greater Ohio Policy Center in Columbus, Ohio. As some of you may know, we are a research and advocacy nonprofit with a vision of a revitalized Ohio and a national research interest in legacy cities. Together with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, Greater Ohio just published a new report on equitable development strategies for smaller American legacy cities. The report is entitled Equitably Developing America's Smaller Legacy Cities, Investing in Residents from South Bend to Worcester. Today's webinar is designed to celebrate and share several great examples of equitable development that exemplify the strategies outlined in the report, which you can download for free from Lincoln's publications page. The report itself offers an actionable guide and recommendations for local stakeholders and residents who are interested in beginning equitable development work in their own communities and in their own smaller legacy cities. It also lays out the academic and research-based case for why promoting equity is more than just the right thing to do, but is also good economic policy. As I mentioned, the report is the result of a long-standing partnership with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, a supporter and advocate for legacy cities in their own right. Before we hear from our three panelists today, I'd like to introduce Jesse Grogan from Lincoln, who is here with us and who has been our close collaborator on this project. Jesse is the Associate Director of Reduced Poverty and Spatial Inequality at Lincoln. She manages their Legacy Cities initiative, which works to equip leaders of smaller legacy cities in the United States with tools and networks they need to equitably revitalize their places. Jesse, do you mind telling our audience more about the Legacy Cities initiative and the work that Lincoln is doing?
Thank you, Erica. I'd be happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be part of the team that brought you this important new report. As you may know, the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy is a private operating foundation that seeks to use land policy, how we use, value, and tax land, to advance social goods in the world. My work specifically is around land as a lever to reduce poverty and the uneven distribution of resources and opportunities around the country and the world. In the US, the legacy cities provide us with a unique opportunity to do just that. These cities are making do without many things, but one thing they almost all have in abundance is land. They have the opportunity to turn what can be a liability into a tremendous asset. And land isn't the only asset these cities have. Many have robust civic sectors, ample existing infrastructure, and perhaps most importantly, the grit and innovative spirit needed to find a new path to success. The Legacy Cities initiative at Lincoln seeks to equip legacy city leaders with the tools and resources that they need to make that path to success a reality. We have a rich library of resources to help legacy city leaders plan for the best future of their places and then implement those plans. You can learn more about the initiative and our resources at legacycities.org. We have events like this one and release new resources fairly regularly, so please sign up for our mailing list while you're there so you can stay up to date on our latest offerings. We firmly believe that the potential of legacy cities is real to define and achieve meaningful success, but it's crucial that the success benefit all the city's residents. Many legacy cities have large Black, Indigenous, people of color populations, and these residents' well-being must be at the center of all of their revitalization efforts. For many, particularly smaller, lower capacity cities, this means making some pretty substantial changes in what gets done and how it gets done. The Equitably Developing America's Smaller Legacy Cities report is a great resource for leaders in those communities, as well as those that are further on the road to equitable development, who are looking for strategies that work and stories from similar places that have already implemented them. And with that, I'll turn it back to Erica to introduce our panelists who will tell you some of those stories. Erica, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you for your partnership, and Greater Ohio thanks the Lincoln Institute for their ongoing commitment to legacy cities. I am really excited to introduce our three panelists today who are going to share inspiring stories and talk about their enlightened programming, all geared around improving measures of racial and economic equity and inclusion in their communities. Our speakers are going to discuss programming that exemplifies just a few of the many ways that equitable development and equity objectives can be incorporated into community development, revitalization, and economic development work. Their work reflects several of the approaches to equitable development that we identified in the report. Before I get to the formal introductions, though, I do need to address a few housekeeping functions. First, we have reserved 10 minutes at the end of the hour for Q&A. Please submit questions to us through the Q&A box, which is at the bottom center of the screen, and we will be collecting questions throughout the hour and then pose them on behalf of audience members to the panelists at the end of the hour. So I repeat again, please use the Q&A box. We are not using the chat for this webinar. And then finally, we will make a recording of the webinar and also PDFs of the presentations available after the program, and that will be housed on the Lincoln Institute website. So with that, it is my pleasure to start introducing our panelists. And our first presenter today is Lark Mallory. Lark is the General Counsel and Director of CDFI Investments for the Affordable Housing Trust for Columbus and Franklin counties in Columbus, Ohio. The Affordable Housing Trust provides low interest rate loans to developers of affordable housing and is also a community development financial institution. We are very happy to have Lark here today discussing an internal equity audit Affordable Housing Trust conducted last year in order to better align the organization's operations with improved equity outcomes within their service footprint. This work is an excellent example of one of the strategies we identify in the report and refer to as recalibrate existing operations to better yield equity. Welcome, Lark.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Lincoln Institute, for inviting me to participate today. As Erica mentioned, we are a lender to developers of affordable housing. And Erica, we need to go back to page 1. So we are a lender to developers of affordable housing, and that's important, obviously, to generate affordable housing, but also because we make loans at 2.5%. We start out at 2.5%. And I share that because that's going to be key to how we implement some of our policies. I am also, although I'm general counsel now, I am also a former board member of the trust. And that's key to this discussion because I think it allowed my voice to be heard differently. After the murder of George Floyd in 2020, we obviously saw a lot of social and civic unrest throughout the country. Columbus, Ohio saw that unrest as well. And we took that as an opportunity for us to have an open and honest dialogue about housing. Our board normally meets every other month to talk about whatever is going on at the organization and also to approve any new loans that have been submitted to us. Instead of doing our normal work, in June of last year, we used that board meeting. Our board chair took it upon himself to use that board meeting for us to talk about social and racial discrimination in housing and its long-term effects. So honest dialogue, I shared with the board I have a 19-year-old son. I shared with the board some of the things that he had experienced, even in our own neighborhood, on our own street. And we also talked about everything from redlining to creating, pockets of poverty, just all types of discrimination within housing and the legalities of that, and how we all know that it was legal to do all of these things over decades of time. You'll see on, and Erica, this is not page one of my slides. As a result, there we go back. As a result of the work we did in that board meeting, our board issued what we call a message to the community. And unfortunately, we're having a little technical difficulties, but you can't see that message. But essentially what we said there was everyone deserves safe, clean, and affordable housing. We acknowledge the systemic racism that had always existed in housing, and then went through a few examples of that systemic racism and the fact that it was legal. While going through this pandemic, one thing that we also acknowledged and learned is that your zip code can determine your health outcomes. So recognizing all of those things, which was included as part of our message to the community, we then went forward, and not only did we make this statement that all lives, and in particular Black lives matter, but we also made some concrete promises to our community of things that we would do. And I'm sorry you can't see all of those. We would now start focusing with our borrowers on removing some barriers that had previously existed. And like I said earlier, we start our loan products out at 2.5%. Right now, the market is right around there for some folks, but that's 2.5% with only 5% equity in the deal. So you may be able to get to 2.5%, but you can't get 5% equity out in the marketplace. So our products are attractive to developers. We know that. We use our products almost as a carrot in adopting some of the things that we wanted to see done. We are going to use, and we decided to start using our platform just to advance equity overall and not just be solely a lender. Out of that work, there's a statement that unfortunately you can't see, but three key points, three key policies that we also adopted. One was a voucher policy. If you want to use our funds and you want to use that 2.5%, 5% equity, then you have to commit to not discriminating based on source of income. So any renter that rents from one of our borrowers, one of our developers, those developers have to agree that they won't discriminate against a renter based on their acceptance or the fact that they have a housing voucher. So we adopted that policy. We've implemented it by making it a covenant in our loan agreements with our borrowers. We also adopted what's called a housing wage policy. And what that policy says is that all of our borrowers will commit to paying all of their employees, doesn't matter from the CEO to the receptionist to the janitor, but all of our borrowers must commit to paying all of their employees what's called a housing wage. And that it's part of the presentation, just can't see it. But that housing wage is determined by referencing to what's called the Out of Reach report, and that's published annually by National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it's based on where you're located and the size of your family. Finally, and you can't, and again, it's taking a step back, we implement implemented that policy also by making it a covenant in our loan agreement. And by having those two covenants in a loan agreement, what happens is if a borrower breaches that, then that's essentially a breach of the agreement. It puts that entire loan in default. We do allow some cures for defaults, but that's the result of breaching one of those covenants by a borrower. Finally, we adopted a minority business enterprise policy, and that's what you have here on your screen. What we internally committed to increasing our minority spend number, but we're also requiring our borrowers to look at their minority spend numbers. This implementation was slightly different than the other two. We had to come up with a way of incentivizing our borrowers to commit to using MBEs. As some of us may know, sometimes you'll have a developer that's vertically integrated. So they'll have a construction company, they'll also have a management company, and then obviously the development company. We needed a way to make sure that those developers, in addition to all of our other developers, were encouraged to use MBEs. So the way that we are implementing this policy is that we are offering a 0.25% discount for our developers who hit a target MBE spend percentage. And all of these policies, like I say, came out of a board meeting last year around this time after the murder of George Floyd, and the board staff taking the time to look at what we were doing with our platform and not merely making low interest rate loans to developers, but also using our platform to push the social and racial equity needle forward. We've received a lot of good feedback on our policies. Obviously, there are times when we've had borrowers with I don't want to say pushback, but with additional questions about what we were doing here. But we've received positive feedback on these efforts from governmental officials, ranging from the city of Columbus to the county in which we're located, Franklin County. Overall, most of our borrowers have been pleased, and they've been satisfied with the efforts that we're making. But they also recognize the fact that we did have issues in housing with systemic racism. And what we saw last spring and last summer is folks just flat out tired of experiencing that racism in various areas of the ecosystem. So that's overall what we've done. And I believe I only have a minute left, so I don't want to ramble here. But hopefully we'll be able to get that message to the community out to all of the participants, the attendees, so that you can see what we did. And I mentioned that earlier that I was on the board, and I think what that did was it allowed my voice to be heard differently. So I do encourage each of you, if you're going to take on this effort, to find someone with a strong enough voice that can rally and get the support of the leaders of the organization around the efforts. Without that support, you obviously can't, you obviously can't, get the work done, and then the implementation portion of these actions will face, you'll be basically walking into, headstrong wind. So that's basically what we did, and that was our efforts to address systemic racism in both just housing in general and affordable housing, understanding the lane in which we operated, and our ability to get our developers to do something more. So with that, I will wrap up my portion of the presentation, and I'll wait for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Lark. I'm sorry for tech difficulties in the background. I think the presentation was presenting and people were able to see things. And I really appreciate your presentation and the concrete policy changes that Affordable Housing Trust made. So thank you for sharing that today. Our next speaker is Dorian Hunter. Dorian is a passionate advocate for the underserved and underrepresented. Growing up on the south side of Springfield, Ohio, a legacy city of 60,000 people, Dorian saw firsthand how disinvestment and a lack of resources can affect a community. The impacts of those experiences led Dorian to dedicate his skills and talents toward building up his community. He is a co-founder of multiple organizations, including Dream Vision, Springfield's NAACP Youth Committee, and the Unified Collective, which was formed last year. The Unified Collective, or the UC, is a coalition of organizations who are dedicated to improving the lives of South Side residents and people of color in Springfield. Dorian's work embodies many of the strategies discussed in the report, including build trust, build a layered and diverse coalition, start small with a micro partnership, and it also reflects our recommendation to consider forming a new intermediary entity to build capacity and coordinate existing efforts. Dorian, thank you for being here today to talk about the Unified Collective and the other work you have led in Springfield. Welcome.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you to all the folks from the Lincoln Institute. I am going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. Okay, let's go back. Is everybody able to see the screen? I think we should be good.
We can see it, Dorian. It looks great.
Okay, thank you. I'm very excited to share some of the work that has been going on in Springfield, some of the initiatives that we have been able to be a part of, and hopefully inspire some efforts to be developed like this, and just try to provide as much insight and inspiration to fighting for this just cause as I can. So I think I came up with a title for this presentation called Uniting and Inspiring a Community Through Equitable Efforts. So I would be remiss if I did not first discuss how these efforts were started and initiated with the Unified Collective and the more strategic efforts that we are in the process of developing. So we're going to take it back a little bit. So how my initial stages of activism and advocacy came about was from my efforts with Dream Vision and the NAACP Youth Committee here in Springfield. So Dream Vision was it started as an after-school program that looked to equip students with the skills and talents and the tools to be successful into adulthood without needing the college degrees or advanced degrees that we see here that are popular in our society. We wanted to develop an after-school program that was essentially able to provide some of those skills through mentorship, through project-based learning. And, we were really pushing towards a 501c3 model where we were a non-for-profit organization. And our mission, was to try to empower our youth through different ways of engagement. And we started this through partaking in different events and different initiatives that were able to provide the youth with some type of value. And the similar was with the NAACP Youth Committee. So we established the local chapter, myself, along with some colleagues and very good friends, and we were able to make a lot of good things happen. We were some of the good things that I'm talking about overlap between the NAACP Youth Committee and Dream Vision. So a lot of the goals were able to be similar. And, essentially it was all about providing youth with opportunities for engagement, opportunities to get out of the house, to get out of the streets and partake in something that was both educational and entertaining. So we went on quite a bit of development with both of the organizations. We started both of these from scratch. And while the NAACP obviously has a national presence, Dream Vision was more of a grassroots organization. Like I said, we were originally looking at a 501c3, but as we learned and as we got that experience, we were able to develop it into more of a social enterprise that developed into a brand that was looking to empower the youth through clothing and different merchandise that had positive messaging and that was able to still inspire the youth to reach and accomplish their goals and dreams. Some major takeaways that we were able to get from these experiences was, understanding what the boots on the ground community work really meant. We were able to truly experience a level of involvement that I had never been experienced. I've never had that experience before. And, all of my colleagues were around my age, maybe a year younger, but it was all our first time. So really both of those experiences equipped us with so many skills and so many different types of insights from the community about what the community actually needed, that was able to instill knowledge in us to continue doing the work that we have done today. So some of the things that we were able to accomplish through Dream Vision and the NAACP was things such as back to school drives, where, in almost every community in general, and especially in Black communities, there are back to school giveaways where they do the book bags and they do, the pencils, pens, all that kind of stuff. Where we wanted to add to the back to school drives where, we understood that, by doing this work, it wasn't just the school supplies where the kids needed help. It was also, their physical appearance. So what we were able to do, we were able to partner with barbers and beauticians to provide the youth with haircuts and coupons for hairdos, because ladies' hair is a little bit different than young men. But we were able to provide that aspect, so they would have a nice haircut, and they could have a coupon for a discounted hairdo at a local hair shop. We also did holiday drives, where we were able to provide families with turkeys. We gave out about 30 to 40 turkeys each year, which isn't a huge amount by any means, but for some young individuals who are passionate about changing the community, we were able to provide some type of value in that way. We were able to partake in some community events and youth programming, which kind of went hand in hand, because a lot of the community events we were involved with involved youth programming. And that was another way that we were able to really engage in the community and provide some value. We were able to, understand what it takes to lead by example. It's one thing to, kind of talk about, all the issues that's going on in the community and, whine and complain, which, a lot of us who are in these legacy communities understand. But it's another thing to, take that step forward and understand that, why not me? Why not us? We're at a position where, we have these connections, we have these tools. So why don't we kind of take part in bettering our own community? And finally, in the midst of a lot of the civil unrest that happened last year with the murder of George Floyd and a lot of other police involved incidents, we also were able to lead a spectacular Black Lives Matter protest. And this is a Black Lives Matter protest that truly wanted to emphasize not the, the trademark Black Lives Matter, but just the phrase in general, Black lives do matter. We wanted to show the community of Clark County that Black lives do matter because, in some of these legacy cities where, traditionally people of color have not had a significant voice, we, took that understanding and wanted to, project our voice to make sure that the entire community held. So those were some of the initial stages. And what the focus is now, we've transitioned to a more strategic approach. So with the Unified Collective, established by a coalition of organizations, including Dream Vision, which is an organization that I mentioned previously, the Conscious Connect, which is a literacy program that's involved with trying to get culturally relevant books to kids in book deserts. Promise Zone Crew, which is a local program that looks to kind of project the feelings and emotions and understandings of youth through music. ClinArc, which is a clinical consulting firm that is all about diversity and inclusion and including these in clinical trials, as well as the NAACP Youth Committee. So we brought all these organizations together and all these individuals together and came to the table like, how can we, and we posed the question, how can we make the most significant impact in our community? In these legacy cities, in these small cities, we're going to get a lot of people that know each other, a lot of people that, may be in some sort of competition, whether that's, open competition, underlying competition, but ultimately, it should be about the same goal. So what we decided to do was to develop a multifaceted coalition of organizations that are all directed towards trying to strive for those efforts of bringing value to communities of color and bringing value to the south side of Springfield, covering the 45505, 45506 zip codes. So with our organizational involvement and to also adding some additional organizations to the committee, we kind of started with a survey process. And what this survey process consisted of was, essentially trying to get the perspective and insights of community members. Doing all of the work that all of these organizations already had in the community, we still felt that we need to give the community a direct opportunity to express themselves. So we started with a survey, and this survey addressed what folks believe are the assets in the community. What are folks saying that is holding the community back? Different questions like that that we tried to take, and what we did take and develop into strategies on how we can bring more value, more inclusion, more equity across the board to the city of Springfield. So some of the impacts that we have made, like I said, we started with this survey, and we are in the process of developing the insights from that survey into strategic action plans. So while some of these projects are in the works, so I can't discuss too much, but I can say that we are involved in some initiatives that we are putting the pieces together that is looking to make a push into equity and inclusion, and really the vision, seeing different leaders of minority groups who are recognized within the city school system. So that's one of the initiatives that we're kind of in the process of doing. And also another is in economic development. So, in a lot of these legacy cities, we do understand that there is a lot of, investment coming in. There is a lot of development going on because, land is cheap and there's the opportunity for sure. Recently, a local grocery store was closed down here on the south side of Springfield. So our initiative involving that was to propose a standard to have X amount of minority representation for jobs involving the development of that institution, and to have a certain amount of minority representation within the new development. So those are some of the projects that we're working on. It went from the work from the NAACP and Dream Vision, where we were just really passionate about getting involved and trying to do an impact. While we're still passionate now, we understand that we need to take more of a strategic approach and get everybody to the table, all of the organizations that are truly looking to improve the conditions of African Americans and people of color and all citizens of the South Side and in the 45505, 45506 zip codes. We're looking to bring value in that way as well. And so the question is why every community needs a unified collective. So as I mentioned before, in these small legacy cities, I feel like specifically here in Springfield, I can't speak for everyone, but specifically here in Springfield, we see a lot of people trying to do their own thing. And, on one hand, I understand it, but on another hand, we're more strong and more powerful and more organized as a collective instead of working as individuals. So that's why, I think these communities need a unified collective. These communities need a collective group that has an established level of trust, that people in the community can rely on, that have a proven record of providing value and giving their efforts towards individuals of color and people of all minority groups. And, furthermore, to, try to inspire this as a culture. I feel like culture building is one of the hardest things that are kind of involved in some of these legacy cities when it comes to redevelopment and understanding what the community truly needs. So all of those are, aspects of why people need and communities need a unified collective. And another initiative that actually it's kind of, this is what I do for full time now, protecting an underserved community. So recently I have been able to take a leap into insurance, and that is my full-time job. And when you look in a lot of these legacy city communities, and I probably need to wrap it up here soon, Erica, huh? But I'll be real quick. Providing access to these different insurance needs that previous, communities like this haven't seen, and also providing the education, and also, still doing the things that are my heart are in, and where we're able to, still embody some of the diversity and inclusion aspects into the workforce. So that's kind of what's going on now. And thank you to all of the viewers. I appreciate all of your time, and look forward to the question and answer series.
Thank you so much, Dorian. Thank you for sharing your great experience building civic capacity and trust in the city of Springfield. We're really glad you're here today to talk about that. Our final presenter is Robert Simpson. Robert is the president of the CenterState Corporation for Economic Opportunity, which is also called CenterState CEO. CenterState CEO is an independent and forward-thinking economic development strategist, business leadership organization, and chamber of commerce dedicated to the success of its members and the prosperity of the Syracuse, New York region. Today, Mr. Simpson will speak about how and why CenterState CEO came to understand inclusion as a critical priority for their region and what they as a business and economic development group are doing to address disparities in economic and racial inclusion. CenterState CEO's work addresses several of the strategies we identified in the report, including emphasize benefits of equitable development to the business community, utilize place-based investments, and cultivate homegrown talent. We are very pleased to have you here today, Robert. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Erica, and thanks all of you, to Lincoln Institute for putting on this program, and to the other panelists and presenters for the great work that you all are doing in your communities. I think for anyone who's involved in this work in any way, shape, or form, there's a certain amount of passion that you have to have for your own communities, for the people who live there, for understanding our past and really trying to mobilize our future. And so this is a great opportunity for us to share a little bit of our story in Central New York. You know, as Erica mentioned, CenterState CEO is a business leadership organization. We are our region's Chamber of Commerce. We are our region's lead economic development organization. We are a business-based organization in so much as we've got about 2,000 members across our footprint, but we have a much more holistic view of economic development that I think is typically associated with business organizations or chambers of commerce. Our vision and our mission is to create a place where business thrives and all people prosper. And that duality of mission is really critical to who we are, to what we do. It drives every programmatic decision we make, some of which we'll talk about here today. And it is, in our opinion, it's fundamental to our ability to build a sustainable community on a go-forward basis. And so as we think about the challenge of building and growing a smaller, call it legacy city in a place like Syracuse, we understand that doing so requires more than just growth. It requires an intentionality about the types of growth that we are seeing. It requires better connecting people to opportunity and really thinking about access and who's benefiting from the types of growth that we're trying to drive here in our region. I'm just trying to get my slides to move. There we go. You know, our work is sort of structured into 5 core portfolios. I won't go through them all, as you can see them on the screen, but these are the different verticals in which we work. We have individual teams. Effectively, we call them portfolios that are running each of these divisions. You know, business development is everything you think it would be. It's our traditional economic development work, working with local companies, working with companies from outside the region who might be looking to relocate here. We also run our region's business incubator and accelerator. We work with about 115 startups a year. Everything we do is grounded in data and policy. So we're constantly looking at and using real-time data to inform our investments, inform our strategy. And, you know, I just want to draw attention in particular to our economic inclusion and our racial equity and social impact portfolios. We formed CenterState CEO in 2010, and it was the product of a merger of 2 previous business associations in Syracuse who frankly didn't work all that well together, didn't share a vision for our region's economic future, actually sort of fought like cats and dogs, if you will. And back in 2010, I had the opportunity to lead the combination of these 2 predecessor organizations. And we very intentionally tried to shed the legacy of both of those previous organizations. And we built a new enterprise, which we call the CenterState Corporation for Economic Opportunity. And we were very intentional about thinking about the region in which we worked. We were very intentional about the fact that this was more than an economic development organization and platform we were building. We were building an organization that was designed to be a community convener, to be a community advocate, and designed to expand the lens of what successful growth looks like. And that is a more equitable and a more holistic approach to growth. Shortly after our founding, we launched our economic inclusion portfolio, and the entire goal of building that portfolio, which now has 9 staff members who work within our economic inclusion portfolio, was designed to take all of the economic development work, right? Our strategic economic development initiatives, our individual business development and business attraction goals. And the economic inclusion team was tasked specifically with connecting all of that growth agenda to people and place, right? Understanding that people experience their economy when they walk out their front door and they experience their neighborhood, whether it's vital and vibrant, whether it's safe, whether it's clean. The conditions on the ground in their neighborhoods impact so much of how they perceive our economy. And we wanted to make sure that place, neighborhoods, downtown, our inner city neighborhoods, our suburban communities, our rural communities, that place was rooted and had a place in our growth agenda, and that there were a team of individuals who were very focused on ensuring that all of those places, particularly our marginalized communities in Syracuse and around central New York, were having opportunities to be a part of economic development and growth conversations. And also people. Unfortunately, there's been some news about Syracuse over the course of the last decade that showcased the fact that from a statistical perspective, we are one of the most impoverished communities in America. We also happen to be one of the communities that has the highest concentrations of poverty among African Americans and Latinos. And so the level of economic segregation that exists in Central New York is simply unsustainable. It's something that is not isn't something that we as a community can achieve our goals if we don't figure out how to turn around. And so, this team was launched really to focus on neighborhood-based, place-based investments and strategies, and empowering those communities that maybe haven't had the capacity to participate in economic growth conversations in the past, providing them the capacity to be at the table and to help set the agenda. And also very heavily focused on workforce development, using our network of 2,000 businesses who are all employers, who are always constantly looking to hire and get people into jobs, using those jobs as an opportunity to provide access, particularly to disadvantaged communities, women, minorities, service disabled veterans, and others that have oftentimes been left out of conversations about employment and career progression. And so those have really been the focuses of our economic inclusion team. I mentioned the merger of the two organizations is really sort of fundamental to what we do. I think the key narrative that I just want to share is how a business-based organization like CenterState CEO has ended up in a place where we have a 9-member economic inclusion team, where we have built and launched a very successful racial equity and social impact portfolio, and how that is a core component of the work that we do as an organization. And the story really began 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when CenterState was created. The recognition that there are two sort of common denominators, right? People and place. That whether you live in a community, in a historically disinvested community, or whether you're an employer or a CEO that drives through those communities on your way to work, business leaders want communities that look vibrant and vital, and they want communities that are safe, just like neighborhood residents do. And business leaders want employees, and they want employees with skills, and they need those employees to be successful. And so in those two places, we felt like there was a significant amount of common ground amongst our community constituencies and our business constituencies that maybe hadn't historically looked at each other as allies, right? Maybe they had thought about the fact that their interests, maybe from their perspective, were misaligned. But when you sat stakeholders down at the table and you began to unpack those details, you really began to understand that their interests, in fact, are inextricably intertwined. They're totally aligned. And in fact, our communities can't be successful without business and jobs, and our businesses cannot be successful without people and place. And so that was really the beginning of our work, looking at projects that help mitigate blight, right, in neighborhoods immediately surrounding downtown, in our downtown itself, and sort of building outward from the inside out within our city and within our community, and finding common ground and building common ground on those approaches. So our strategic goals, have really been around increasing employment, trying to grow neighborhood-owned businesses, build community wealth, improve community health, enable stronger and better and more diverse social networks within our community, and again, to reduce that blight, to grow investment, particularly in places that haven't seen it. And in some cases, we have neighborhoods that haven't seen significant investment in decades, and we're beginning to turn the corner on that, which is a very exciting thing for those of us in the work here in Syracuse. You get a sense, as I mentioned, some of the historical data about Syracuse and where we have been One of the ways in which we've done that, and this is something I'm extremely proud of, one of our programs called WorkTrain. And WorkTrain is a platform that is effectively all of our workforce development programming occurs under the WorkTrain brand. We have several different industry sector strategies at play, but one of the ones that's been most successful is a program we call Health Train. And over the course of the last 7 years, we've trained more than 1,000 members from our marginalized communities here in Syracuse and placed them directly into jobs with two primary healthcare systems, both Loretto and the St. Joseph's Hospital network here in Central New York. Now, both of these employers previously had turnover rates that were approaching 50 to 60% in some of their nursing roles. Both of these employers were really struggling to fill vacancies in certain healthcare, front-facing healthcare worker roles. And we have managed to achieve an 85% placement rate and a 75% retention rate of our WorkTrain and our Health Train employees with those two employers, saving those employers a significant amount of money and helping people get access to jobs, good paying jobs, stable jobs, and jobs that have opportunities for career advancement. And in working with these two primary healthcare systems, they have completely transformed the way they hire, how their interview processes go, what their post-employment support systems look like. And these two employers have really done a phenomenal job in embracing the sort of widening of their lens of who might be a good employee for these two systems. They used to take a very narrow view, right, with very specific credentials. Now they're taking a much wider view. They're getting many more applicants, and we're delivering training programs and people that want to be on the job, and they are saving money and seeing better outcomes, healthcare outcomes for their patients. The WorkTrain program, as I mentioned, we have sector partnerships in healthcare, in manufacturing, in construction, and now in tech. Each of these is demonstrating really positive goals and outcomes. We, CenterState CO, do zero training. We are nothing but an intermediary. We identify employers that have persistent and unmet need from a labor force standpoint. We then interface with community-based organizations across Syracuse and Central New York that are working directly with traditionally disadvantaged client populations. We do some needs-based assessment for our employers. We do some skills-based assessments for those client populations, and then we outsource the training. We do the curriculum development, and then we outsource the training providers to others in our community that are skilled and versed in doing that. Some of our educational institutions, some of our workforce-based organizations. But all told, since 2014, you can see over 1,100 people placed, and a really, really positive retention rate that we're excited about. And the investments that we've made here in Syracuse are getting some national attention. Back just 2 years ago, we were selected as one of the 5 winners of the JP Morgan Chase Advancing Cities Challenge. There were, I think, 264 communities across America who applied, 5 that were selected. Syracuse, by far the smallest community, but what JP Morgan Chase told us is that they were investing in a smaller community that had demonstrated some aptitude for delivering results and actually helping provide pathways for individuals out of poverty into an employment and sustained employment with opportunities for career advancement. So our entire Advancing Cities agenda is built around those specific goals, built around supporting the growth and investment in our XBE enterprises. It's built around the growth of our tech-based industry here in Syracuse and how we can make tech-based employment provide more equitable access to jobs in tech, because we know that tech has a historical reputation for being a relatively homogeneous industry that often drives greater income inequality instead of changing. So we're building tech apprenticeship programs and a variety of other strategies that are helping get many of our individuals from our inner city and elsewhere in impoverished communities around Central New York into tech jobs that have opportunities for advancement. Syracuse Build is another program that we've launched. We have actually I was a little late to this call. We were just with Secretary Buttigieg, who's in town, announcing some details around our a big interstate teardown project that's happening here in Central New York, rectifying some of the ills of planning that were done in the 1960s. But one of the challenges that we know we will face with the $2 billion highway construction project in Syracuse is the need for local labor. We have a lot of people locally who need jobs, who want jobs, and so we're building in partnership with our city and our county. We built a program called Syracuse Build, which is a training program specifically designed to get hundreds, if not thousands, of Syracuse residents into trades and apprenticeships in construction prior to the start of construction next year on the large $2 billion project.
Rob, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask if you could wrap up soon so we have time for a couple questions.
Yeah, I'll stop here and wrap. I think the final thing that I just want to emphasize, you know, obviously the conversations around race and equity and how they tie into development are at the forefront of everyone's mind, certainly over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. Really proud of the work we're doing. We are currently working with over 100 businesses here in Central New York. We actually have a series of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, services, and trainings that we offer directly as an organization. And we're working with business leaders who are trying to better understand their corporate responsibility, the accountability that consumers and others and their employees are placing on them, and really giving them tools to be not just active participants, but leaders in racial equity conversations in Syracuse and Central New York. We're seeing great returns on those investments. Really proud of the work that's being done here and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Rob. It's always great to hear about how the business community can be engaged in these efforts. So I really appreciate that. We are closing in on 2 o'clock, but I want to try to get questions to everyone. Lark, we've had a question for you that I hope that you can talk a little bit more about. Someone's interested in kind of process-wise, how you went about doing your equity audit, and if you can talk about what sort of lessons you have for other people who might want to consider doing that at their own organization. Were there critical components they should be keeping in mind?
Sure, and I realize that I saw a couple of questions, so I'll try to be brief here, but please feel free to follow up with me if you want to talk more about it. I'm assuming they can reach out, Erica. So like I mentioned earlier, our entire process began with a board meeting. It was just our board chair recognizing he's a realtor, he owns an appraisal company, and he's also an attorney, realizing that systemic racism has existed in housing forever, right? So since we can go back as far as the 20s and come up with some of the laws that were put in place and that contributed to where we are as a society with respect to affordable housing and housing in general. So our process began with just a simple conversation by the board at our meeting, talking about systemic racism, what we could do. Honestly, after listening for about 30 or 35 minutes, I just chimed in and said, I mean, the easiest thing, the fastest thing, what we need to do immediately is issue a statement. At that time, every place, every store, every brand, we were getting statements from law firms, accounting firms, issue a statement. But in drafting our statement, I made a point of not just saying Black Lives Matter, but to also come up with some concrete steps that kind of came out of that meeting of what we can do in our lane. Obviously, we can't do anything about the minimum wage across the country. We can't do anything with respect to affordable housing about police brutality. But with respect to housing in our lane, we have the ability to make a difference. So while we can't necessarily make everyone pay $15 an hour or however much, we can make our borrowers do it. So from that meeting, from this statement, we then held several small groups to talk about next steps. From those groups, as general counsel, I drafted policies that were shared. Our board adopted those policies. And then from there, I came up with implementation strategies from those policies. So it took us several months. I want to say we started this in June. Our board adopted the policies by December. I didn't want this to drag on forever. You know, at some point you got to, put your money where your mouth is and do something. So that's kind of how we got here. It took 6 months from that board meeting until our December meeting to actually come up with some concrete policies that we could take And then it took me a couple of additional months to figure out how to implement those, especially with respect to the MBE policy. I think I answered.
Thank you, Lark. Thank you, yes. Dorian, I have a sort of similar question for you. I think there are probably people in the audience who would like to establish organizations similar to what you've done with the Unified Collective. So can you talk about what you see as being the key ingredients that helped you get traction, and what other assets people can look for in their own communities as they're trying to stand up similar organizations?
Yeah, so I would say the first and foremost, most important point that I would like to highlight is putting pride to the side and understanding that the collective effort is more impactful and comes with more opportunity to create a true large a felt impact. So definitely put the pride to the side. Don't be afraid to approach other people who you may not typically be in contact with, and just take that somewhat of a leap of faith and say, hey, we're trying to do something for the entire community. Are you able to get on board? So I'd say that, and also a more intrinsic part would be having the passion to do this type of work. When you have the passion, things like putting pride to the side and taking risks, they're not as big of a task as they may seem to someone who may be on the fence. And also having energy, having young individuals who are ready and willing, and also not being afraid to put something on the line for this effort. A lot of there's everybody in the world, in the country, understands what's going on to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, when it comes to solving the problem, I think it comes down to what are you willing to risk to really put your name on the line as being a part of this solution. So I think all of those aspects are some of the main points that I'd consider to assembling something similar to the community organization that we have with the Unified Collective.
Thank you so much. Okay, this will be our last question to Rob. Rob, we have several questions in the Q&A about whether you are experiencing new issues with gentrification and displacement in neighborhoods where you're investing, and if so, how you're addressing those issues.
Yeah, so the short answer is no, not yet. There's a lot of fear of gentrification. There's a lot of conversation around it. But the reality is property values in many of the neighborhoods in which we are doing work right now, where we've seen success at driving some private sector investment, have been frankly so artificially deflated for such a long period of time that we aren't yet seeing the types of growth in property values that would lead to any of the issues associated with gentrification. It is absolutely something that we see as a potential threat. A lot of the conversations that we're having right now, specifically the biggest driver, I think, that has the potential to drive any meaningful gentrification in some of the disadvantaged neighborhoods we're in, is actually the major investment around tearing down our current interstate and the redevelopment associated thereof. And so we're having conversations right now around things like community land trusts and other tools that would allow us to provide some certainty, predictability, and wealth creation opportunities for individuals who live in those neighborhoods.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we are over time, so I want to wrap this up now and not keep anyone too long. But I want to thank everyone in the audience who made a point to be with us today, and then especially give a very hearty thank you to our panelists who really inspire me, and I hope also inspired the audience. And of course, we want to thank the Lincoln Institute for their continuous support of developing this series and work in legacy cities in general. So please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any more questions about what we've discussed today. And as a reminder, the webinar and the slides will be archived on the Lincoln Institute's website, I think, pretty soon. So thank you all for coming today, and I'll say goodbye.